It's almost like you're drawing a character sheet of like, what
You are.
version
That's
of
what you
me,
did. You built a character sheet for
and it
yourself.
worked. And then you basically make sure that as you get to rebuild your life from the ground up with this new stage, you are building around that character and seeing yourself as that person. And that's crucial because if you do not internalize yourself as that person when you're on autopilot mode, your sort of default model of yourself is that revised person. So when you
Mhm.
respond, you're responding and reacting in a way that that person would.
And we do this as a married couple all the time. We basically take our character sheets and we're like, if you look at Simone, this sort of like peasant, medieval peasant woman, this was not her historic archetype that she did in public.
Would you like to know more?
Well, I love you to death, Simone. And today's
Hmm.
topic is actually from a fan.
Oh,
Also, so I'm quoting a fan's email to us. Also, if you ever find yourselves with a dearth of topics, unlikely as that may be, I'd love to hear you expand on the perspective/approach Malcolm mentioned in passing of escaping our programming, biological or otherwise. I'm
hmm.
curious how you all might see escaping as it relates to optimization. Do you see our programming as something to break away from, or as something to optimize by returning the system to a more ideal state of balance? I tend to think in terms of the latter, that our operating systems are not broken, but out of balance, and rebalancing is the best method for increasing growth, strengths, and innovation in the individual, family, and community. Love to hear your thoughts.
Oh, this isn't just a fan. This is someone we now have categorized in our CRM as a family friend of high value. So thank you. You know who you are for the great topic. And this is going to be fun to talk about.
Yeah. Do you have thoughts to start?
I mean, our general philosophy, and tell me if I'm getting this wrong, but the way that I believe we see it is our the entire core of what makes us human and what makes us civilized essentially is the distance between us and our default instincts. Our The more that we follow our default instincts, the more that we are akin to animals and know better than them, the more that we are able to rise above and show inhibitory control and focus on our values that we logically arrived at rather than our feeling instinctually, the more we are demonstrating the fact that we are the very differentiating factor that makes us more than just animals, that makes us human. So we do not believe about necessarily returning to some form of symbiosis or some natural state or returning balance. No, no. The whole point is to pull away, to overcome, to rise above.
Mhm. Well, actually, yeah, this reminds me of in upcoming tracks that we have, where we are defining good and evil. A lot of society defines good and evil based off of just what is pro-social and antisocial, because these are the traits that, when held by the aggregate member of society, help those individuals who are trying to, in average, help the individuals who are striving for personal hedonism or some sort of distributed hedonism value system.
Mhm.
And as such, they always end up as social value systems. But they're not actually good and evil. They're just what's in the best interest of the average individual. Whereas we see there being as two alternate primary competing value systems. One we see as truly good and the other we see as truly bad. And we categorize these into spiral and anti-spiral energy. Whereas the core of a spiral-based philosophy is intergenerational human improvement, or rather the maximization of human potentiality. And the sort of optimization function of anti-spiral energy is the elimination of human potentiality. And so we categorize these into like words that people might know or be familiar with. And one of the words that we would see as sort of core to anti-spiral thinking is harmony or balance, instead of words like, which would be core to spiral energy, industry and ambition. And actually this comes from Gurren Lagann, if anyone's familiar with that, is where we borrowed the concept, but I think it's really beautifully explained and illustrated in this anime. And so why not, And we'll get into why we did that in the future. But so in that regard, I agree with you. But then there's this second aspect of breaking your programming, which is like a whole different aspect of our literature, which some of you may not be familiar with. I mean, those who may not know, we've written 5 books. We wrote 5 books before we started doing these podcasts. And the very first book we wrote, The Pragmatist Guide to Life, individuals who it's actually used by a lot of psychologists now. So like I have psychologists call me about it and stuff like that. Like it's a book that is frequently used within psychology offices because and they don't know this often when they call, but it's immediately obvious to me why it was used by psychologists. When I first wrote the book, it started as a manual for an alternative to cognitive behavioral therapy. So cognitive behavioral therapy is a little old at this point, and I was like, can I build an alternative that is based around individual value systems? And this theory I have for how sort of humans contextualize themselves and how the human mind works, which is much more narrative focused and focuses much more on the experiments around fixing those narratives. And it used to actually have, and you can still see this in sort of the architecture of the book, which makes it very different from our other books. It's almost like a series of prompts. It has a core prompt for an individual, and then it would have had they answer X or Y, and then you answer Z or D, so that the psychologist would always have an answer to any of the person who was talking with them answers or questions, right? And now it just comes off as huge lists of like potential ways you could think about something or respond to something, which I think for a lot of people might be more helpful. But anyway, the relevant point here being that a big part of this is this idea that a lot of the way we contextualize ourselves are these internal narratives. And these internal narratives we pick up from society, and that the moments in our day when we are genuinely lucid and making decisions for ourselves are small, maybe maximum 5% of the day. Most of our human life is on autopilot. And that autopilot is determined by the self narratives we have about ourselves, by the type of people that we think we are.
And
so,
also to a certain extent by our surroundings, the accoutrement, like if you're sitting next to a bag of chips, you're way more likely to eat it, that kind of thing.
why do you leave these children's sacks all around me?
No.
Peanut butter Cheez-Its. They're so good. Children's snacks are so much better than adult snacks.
That's the problem. That's how they get you.
Fruit by the foot. Come on, guys. Kids don't have that. It's actually that's like a fancy version now that's like mashed up fruit that's in consolidated, like I don't know, dehydrated, and then you eat it. It's like supposed to be healthy, but I don't know. It's delicious.
Well, you see though now, like I mean, not to like go off on a total tangent, but like along our recurring theme of the infantilization of adults, you now see all these kid foods that are now sold to millennials, like the weird looking mac and cheese, grown up cereal. And it's like, it has like very millennial targeted branding, and it costs like 10 times more, but they're like, but it's keto.
Dollars at Walmart for like a box of mac and cheese.
Yeah, but it's with lentil noodles and chickpea noodles, so there's like protein, and the cereal's totally keto, so you should buy it for like $15. And but like it's just kid food for adults, which is so they do it. Malcolm.
But the marketing's on point. I will agree. The marketing appeals to me.
Oh no, that's how it caught our eye. This is
I
why we
look
know
at
about
it and I'm like, this is some nice looking mac and cheese.
Like, I'm gonna buy it, and then we look at the price and we're like, we're gonna eat our kids' food instead.
Yeah, dude, we'll get the children's mac and cheese and eat that. But the point I'm making here is that you have these internal narratives of who you are. And in a lot of ways, these internal narratives determine the emotional state you will experience based on the environment you're in during most of the time when you're like not in these rare lucid states that humans experience. And that what this means is I always use the Addams Family as this great example of this, right? You know, so the Addams Family sees a rose that's dying or with its head cut off, and they experience happiness. An Addams Family member sees, you know, things that in other people would cause, you know, gloom or moroseness. And they have chosen for themselves as an internal narrative that they experience happiness from these things. And we've talked about this in other episodes, but it's worth going over because it's actually a really interesting point about the Addams Family. And I think that modern writers has sort of forgotten or missed this point about the Addams Family. The joke about the Munsters, okay? The core joke of the Munsters that makes the Munsters interesting and funny is that they are monstrous people, like they are monsters, but they are attempting to live the life of the average American family. Okay? The joke about the Addams Family is that they are normal people, but they are made monstrous in their deviation from mainstream cultural expectations to the extent that they are more culturally similar and have a more personal affinity and get more acceptance within a society of monsters than they do within a society of people. The joke, the point of the Addams Family is that they are normal humans that differentiate from common social norms so much that they are seen as monstrous. And then the meta joke on top of this is always layered with the Addams Family. But despite that, they are more emotionally happy. They are more emotionally fulfilled with their relationship. They have a better relationship with their kids, and everything is good. They have a better sexual relationship. Everything about them differentiates from society, and yet it is working for them. And
Yeah.
it's not working for the rest of the world. That's the joke of the Addams Family. It's a joke about society, that society monsterizes them, others them for being so different. And yet, but anyway, I'm getting a bit off topic here, but it's an interesting point to me because I think that this is what people miss. The Addams Family aren't cool because they're monsters. They're cool because they're not monsters, but they are so true to themselves
Hmm.
that they are seen as monsters by society. And
Yeah,
what
they're
being
cool
true
because
to
they're
themselves,
based,
yeah,
basically.
basically. What being true to themselves means within this context is that they have chosen self narratives for themselves. Like, why do you get happiness when you see roses versus like live sprayed roses versus dead roses? Really no reason. It's a level of cultural priming and self narrative. It's true for so many things in our lives where we don't really think about why these things cause us happiness, other than this is just how we allowed the world around us to program ourselves. But
Mhm.
that programming isn't who we are. It's like the random debris we collected as like a sticky ball rolling down a dirt road, right? You can spray that off and design yourself to be whoever you want. That was the point of the Pragmatist Guide to Life. And the key way that an individual does this is with something we call flux periods in the book. So a flux period is created when an individual goes through a significant narrative shift within their life. So the truth is that you don't have one narrative. Okay, like earlier I was saying, like individuals have narratives that determines their emotional responses to environmental stimuli. True, but you actually have multiple layered narratives that appear within different social cues and social contexts. What does that mean? That means that the narrative that you developed within your office is different from the narrative you developed at home, and it's different than the narrative you developed among your family growing up. This is why often when individuals are around social cues and contexts that remind them of their childhood, i.e., their parents, their siblings, and their childhood home, they are going to show dramatically more childish emotional responses to stimuli around them because
Yeah, I think
they
a lot of
are,
people can like empathize with reverting to annoying childlike
yeah,
versions
they're
of
like, why
oneself
did I let
around.
that get to me? I haven't been like that in years.
Exactly. But
Because
then
they're
you're back
adopting.
home and you're with your parents and like it all falls apart. All the composure you
Yeah.
once had.
And who a person is at their office, you will emotionally respond differently to things at your office than you might when you're on like your local sports team or something like that.
Mhm. Yeah, I
Because
think
it,
a key way to think about it is to a great extent the various contexts you have in your life act like a set on a play. And we are actors responding to our costumes, to our cues, and to our co-stars and supporting actors and all that, right? So when you are in a set where you are dressed like a business person and surrounded by professionals and treated like a professional, yeah, you're more likely to act like a professional and a mature person. And when you are on a set surrounded by characters who are literally your parents who are also like treating you more like a kid and not really normalizing to the fact that oh my gosh you've grown up, you're going to start acting more like a kid.
but it will
So
also act like that as well, not just because parents are treating them that way, but because of environmental cues.
yeah, but so when it comes to flux periods, why they're really important, and this is something that is
Oh, hold on. Before we go deeper in flex periods, I want to
uh-huh
talk about a different context of this, which is actually really interesting. So
oh
if you talk about humans as being like on a set, a really interesting example is when people are intentionally structuring parts of their lives to bring out internal narratives that are incredibly specialized to masturbating some aspect of their sense of self, which isn't something that they can embody in everyday life. And one example of this is the reason why BDSM dungeons, for example, are so different than your daily life. Like they have so many contextual cues within them that you're in a very different environment. You wear different costumes in the same way you're wearing one costume for your family and one costume for work. It's
mhm.
to trigger different narrative states really easily because they're trying to change everything that's associated with these narrative triggers. But now we're also seeing hobbies based around changing narrative states. That is what furries fundamentally are. The people who dress in fur, dress like anthropomorphic animals and go to conventions and interact with other people, is they have realized I can write my persona's personality, design a persona around that personality, and then embody that personality. They are choosing to experience being somebody radically different from who they are, and they are finding a level of catharsis in this.
So back to flux periods, it is
Yeah.
really difficult to find a time in someone's life where their set gets to change, right? Like it's not like every day you're suddenly changing your social surroundings, your clothing, your schedule, your lifestyle, your food. Like this is very difficult. And governments have struggled with this as well. So there are many. First, I think this was really popularized by the Nudge Unit within the UK. There's a book called Inside the Nudge Unit. They didn't actually call it the Nudge Unit. Well, I think they did informally, but they had another different name for this department that tried to do behavioral interventions that would, basically help people live better lives, but cost taxpayers very little. And they found, for example, when trying to intervene in parenting in a way that led to positive outcomes, they really were only able to successfully change behavior at one point in people's lives. And that was only the first time they became a parent. Now, this makes sense because this is a very good example of a flux period where someone's life dramatically changes, their identity dramatically changes, their surroundings, the people that they can befriend and hang out with, everything shifts, their schedule, etc. And so at that point, people are forced to reinvent themselves. They're put into a new set, they're a new character, and they're actually able to change their behavior. And so then they decided to really double down and focus in on policy interventions with first-time parents because that made sense. Other really common examples of flux periods are moving to a new city to get a job or fundamentally changing your career. And a good, like from high school to college, from college to your first job. And then if you change to a violently different job in a different city, maybe that as well. This is one reason why when people are trying to quit an addictive, like a very dangerously addictive thing, they may move to another country just to completely do that. But of course, the problem is if you move back to your old set, you're going to fall back to old ways.
Well, this is shown really effective in Vietnam. They found that when people were returning to the US, I think it was heroin addictions, something like 78% of people lost their heroin addiction. So even when you're talking about very deep-seated neurological
chemical, like
compulsion,
real.
like this is real. This is much more than just like who you are.
Mm-hmm.
So there's two ways to take advantage of flux periods in your life. One is to identify upcoming flux periods and then
plan.
build narratives for when you enter them. This could be entering college. This could be a new job. This could be a new relationship. This could be a new, anything like that you have upcoming. You can identify it as a flux period and then try to change. The other is to intentionally create flux periods, as Simone was talking about. This can be done by moving and changing jobs and changing friend circles and changing self-conceptions.
Mm-hmm.
But these are difficult to do, but they are an option that is in a way available to most of the human population. It just requires sacrifice, as anything of value does, and a lot of intentionality.
Yeah. And I'm realizing, this isn't just a like wealthy person thing. I've been completely addicted to this one show on or like YouTube channel on budgeting. And there are a lot of very low income, like not even low income, but like deeply in debt people, like clearly don't have money, but like they are also capable and they frequently do move across the country, change cities, etc. Like you can, regardless of your level of income, change your location and your context, and it can be very helpful.
Yeah. And a lot of people are like, but then I don't have my support network and stuff like that. And it will be like, well, one thing that might be in your advantage is to change yourself into the type of person who builds your own support network.
Well, and support networks can also be enablement networks. They can facilitate bad behaviors that are holding you down.
Well, and they can see you as your previous self. So something that is commonly true among support networks that are your home support network or the network you grew up in is that they contextualize you as who you were as a child. And this is constantly true of people's parents,
or even just before you got better or improved. Like I remember I changed a ton when I met you because you ask me, well, what are your core values? What do you want to achieve with your life? And I told you, and you're like, okay, but you understand you're not going to be able to do that if you continue to dress and act the way that you're dressing and acting. And so we totally changed my outfit. We totally changed the way that I like my tone of voice and my styling. And then when people like, so there was a colleague of mine who was previously at the startup where I worked, where I went from, after you helped me with my makeover, social media manager, which is like very low frontline employee kind of
Basically
thing,
managing a Facebook page.
to director of marketing. And I told this former team member of this startup that happened. She was like, no, you didn't. And she wasn't joking. She was not the kind of person who knew how to joke, I think. She just didn't believe me because the person that she knew before was not that. And being surrounded by people like that, people surrounded, you're like being surrounded by people who are like, no, you're not going to go sober. Like, of course you're going to try for a while and then you're going to fail. Like, then of course you're going to fail because they're not helping you. You need to be around people. Also, like, you can see this is kind of correlated to the research that finds that things like fatness and depression are kind of contagious. Yeah, that if you have a lot of fat friends, you're much more likely to be fat. If you have a lot of depressed friends and family, you're more likely to be depressed. Like, these things catch. So yeah,
And
I mean,
I hate to
planning
say
for,
this, you want to hear something offensive? The
oh,
data does show, oh, I probably shouldn't say this, but I
say
will.
it.
If you have gender dysphoria and you
Oh,
change your friend group to a friend group that isn't populated with a lot of trans individuals or people with gender dysphoria, it goes away. I'm not going to say this is a social phenomenon, but I am going to say that there is evidence that gender dysphoria is in part within some individuals a result of societal narratives.
that's, I
And
see.
it is very painful, I understand, from individuals who experience it. And so we are just offering this as an alternative to some of the potentially more expensive alternatives out there, and may help. Because it does, I don't like to hear people struggling or suffering, and when there is a real alternative that works, it's worth highlighting.
Yeah,
And again, I would say that this is something I'm inferring from the research. And the reason I'm inferring this from the research is it appears to emerge in individuals when they are in social circles that are overwhelmingly gender dysphoric or trans, and it doesn't emerge before then. And these individuals have a very common narrative when I'm reading these narratives, which is when they reflect back on their lives, they'll say, I saw this as a major issue throughout my life. But at any individual period in their life, if you ask them or other people, they wouldn't have seen this as an issue. And then sort of all of a sudden they begin to fixate on it as an issue. And then all of a sudden it becomes the most important issue of their lives,
yeah,
and it begins to really eat at them, and it becomes something they're thinking about constantly. But it's this sort of spiral that increases in importance in their daily lives over and over and over as days continue, that is fed by a community that is reinforcing that spiral. And that whether it's an online community or a narrative building community within but it's not something that happens totally organically. I actually don't think I've ever seen an instance of it happening totally organically. It's always some sort of online community or something like that, which identifies the problem and then feeds behavior and narratives around the problem.
totally.
And when I'm saying the problem, I'm talking about gender dysphoria, not being trans. Trans is not a problem. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that some of this stuff can be narrative based issues instead of biological issues.
So if you know that you have a chance to change your context, that you're approaching a flux period where your entire set dressing whatnot can be changed, first you need to make sure that you fully own personally your fundamental values and your objective function of life, the thing you want to maximize most or the things you want to maximize most. Because if you don't have that straight, you're not going to get anything straight. Second, then you have to decide, okay, who is the ideal persona? Like, what is the ideal model of a person that at least is dealt the cards that I've been dealt.
And
Like, you
this means
can't.
new wardrobe, potentially, new accent, new,
Yeah, but like,
inflection.
what are they like? It's almost like you're drawing a character sheet of like what
You are.
version
That's
of
what you
me,
did. You built a character sheet for
and it
yourself.
worked. And then you basically make sure that as you get to rebuild your life from the ground up with this new stage, you are building around that character and seeing yourself as that person. And that's crucial because if you do not internalize yourself as that person when you're on autopilot mode, your subconscious is not going to like,
Well,
and I'm using the word subconscious, not like I'm a Freudian or Jungian, let's be clear about that. But your sort of default model of yourself is that revised person. So when you respond, you're responding and reacting in a way that that person would.
Yeah. Well, I am deeply happy of the people, and we do this as a married couple all the time. We basically take our character sheets and we're like, if you look at Simone, this sort of like medieval peasant woman, this was not her historic archetype that she did in public. My historic archetype, I've actually started wearing the outfit more because we get good response from it from fans, and I might go back more towards it, is the suit. But I used to always wear a three-piece suit, always.
Yeah. With jeans.
With jeans, always with jeans. People can't tell that in the show, but even still, I'm always wearing it with jeans. But I stopped wearing it because it seemed a little juvenile. By that, what I mean is some archetypes work better for specific age ranges. And that worked really well when I was a young, up and coming sort of like boy genius CEO and venture capitalist. It works a lot less well when I am a middle-aged dad venture capitalist. It just makes me look young. And it's the same as you, with your hair. You're growing it out now. Brian Kaplan's suggestion, by the way, he goes, with your audience, I think you should have longer hair. And we're like, you know what? We agree. And also, I think that short hair on women looks uniquely hot when a woman is incredibly useful. This is just my perspective, right? But I do not think it serves middle-aged women well. It makes them look like Karens, basically, right? Instead of like hot Vulcans. And so, she's going for this more mid hair look. And this is something you have to keep in mind as you age, is that the narratives you have built for yourself at a younger age in terms of how you interact and how you present yourself may not work.
Well, and I think this is also like kind of, it dovetails with the ongoing argument you have about people not realizing that also the things that make them happy are going to change over time. And that, a lot of people are stuck with their perpetual teenage model of self, both like internally and externally and in terms of their goals. When you do actually have to adjust the model and your character to adapt not only to what makes you happy as an older person, but also to adapt to the cards that you've been dealt. Because what I was alluding to earlier is like, you can't just be like, oh, well, I'm just going to act like I'm Tony Stark, because that kind of person is more likely to.
Yeah, I don't have those cards.
Yeah. Like, I'm sorry. Are you a really wealthy, extremely well-connected genius? Because if not, I think you're going to have to like, adapt for your health profile, your fitness profile, your age, your economic starting point, your background, your culture, and your looks. And you can't just like
I have to say, I uniquely loved your pre-mom profile. So I remember when we were workshopping this, it was when I was in Korea. And the one that we had basically, if you see all pictures of her, you'll see this. This was post. So when we first started dating, your profile was like these big hat thing. What are they called?
Fascinators.
These big fancy hat things and sort of quirky, but otherwise a little conservative-ish and professional outfits, but nothing else. And when I first met her, she had extremely long hair, like below her butt. Like it was like a hippie. I did not enjoy that. And so she cut her hair and she did that for a while after cutting her. The fascinators when she still had long hair. And then you went into what we had developed was like this incredibly competent and stern sort of like fascist chic, I guess I'd call it, all black, tight fitting, like high, large boots, stuff like that in your outfits and stuff. You looked like
I went from fascism to feudalism.
Right. And well, that's what people call us, right? Techno feudalists, right?
Yeah, right.
At least you're not calling us techno fascists anymore.
Whatever.
But it was a hot outfit. It was very Hugo Boss. Joking, we never would buy designer brands, but they had a phase when I was younger where they went into this sort of like gossy authoritarian look that you really embodied in that previous stage, and I really like that. I love you to death, Simone, and you are the best wife any man could ever hope for because you have chosen to build that as a narrative for yourself. And you have chosen that things, or at least my intuition is you've chosen things that will make me happy, make you happy.
Oh,
and that's the way I've built myself as well. I see myself, it's very important to me to be a good husband to you because that is my narrative these days.
Yeah, and you know what? That is a really common thread among very successful couples, is that a core part of their identity is that they want to do well by their spouse and partner and surprise and delight them. So another
Mhm.
thing to keep in mind for those who are looking to reinvent themselves. Mhm.
Love you.
Love you too. Okay.
You said you
Sorry, just sending instructions to the team about American Airlines, which has once again done something antagonistic toward travel agencies. They basically
Mm,
say you will not accrue American Airlines miles anymore if you book with an agency, unless it is a preferred agency. But the preferred agency has to book a certain percentage of its flights using NDC. And if you don't use the new distribution capability, this certain percentage of amounts, you're not a preferred agency. But the problem that our agents come back with is, well, yeah, except NDC prices are worse than the prices on AA.com. So I just booked directly on AmericanAirlines.com. And then why should we be penalized for that? Because that's what they want anyway. And our rep basically just wrote back to us like, that's not true. We don't have price differences.
huh. So people who don't know, our day job is running a travel agency, a chain of travel agencies, a global chain of travel agencies. One of the biggest in the South, actually. More, I don't know, it used to be, but travel agencies are a thing of the past these days. So,
Airlines have decided they don't like us. They're not wrong, because cutting out bureaucrats and middlemen and unnecessary layers, including the software that airlines used to use to get bookings made for them, and including travel agencies in many instances, is the smart thing to do. Why pay for middlemen when it's efficient and easy to have things go directly with you? I don't fault them. We still provide a lot of value for complex and group and entertainment and production travel, but I'm just so frustrated. I just sometimes. Anyway, I do love
well,
you. And this
eventually
is
we'll
our
have
post work. Like, we both wake up. You wake up at 2 a.m. I wake up at 4 a.m. so we can finish early and save time to do podcast recordings is our personal date time. And I'm going to focus on that now and not the fact that my job really stresses me out.